So now we're going to go through the different parts of the brain, talk about what they look like, what are their functions. So first let's start with the brain stem. So we're right here. And this is composed of three parts. We've got the medulla oblongata, which is down here, the pons right here, and then the midbrain right here. And so you've got two different views. This is a ventral view, which means anterior, and then this is a dorsolateral view, so you can see the side and the posterior side as well. And so first we have the medulla oblongata, and this looks almost like an extension of the spinal cord. So it starts down here, which is where you would have the foramen magnum, and then extends rostrally, so up, for a couple of centimeters. And it's got these pyramid ridges. So these are pyramids that look kind of like a bunch of baseball bats laying together. This is going to control some of our fundamental functions. So things like hearing, equilibrium, touch, temperature, taste, pain, chewing, vomiting, respiration, speech, coughing, sneezing. These are things that you don't really think about, that your body just does. And all of these fibers that connect from the spinal cord to the brain have to go through the medulla oblongata. And 90% of those fibers cross sides, so they have a decussation. Remember, that's when you go from right to left or left to right. And that happens in these pyramids. So the majority of information getting to your brain crosses from one side to the other somewhere here in the medulla oblongata. North of that, we have the pons, so rostrally. In the anterior side, you can see it's got kind of these two broad bulges. On the posterior side here, you can see that the cerebellum has been cut away, and you can see the sides here of the pons. So inside of the medulla and continuing up into the pons, there's networks of fibers called the reticular formation. And these are tracts, so tracts of nerves from the medulla that come all the way up into the pons, and then will continue on into the midbrain. So the pons is going to be responsible for things like sleep, respiration, body posture. And then rostrally again, we have the midbrain. So this is going to be what connects the hindbrain to the forebrain. So again, still part of the brainstem. And it continues this reticular formation, which is a network of fibers that comes all the way up through the medulla to the pons to the midbrain. Inside of the midbrain, we also have the cerebral aqueduct. So inside of here is going to be, so here's the fourth ventricle here, and then that cerebral aqueduct is going to run up inside of the midbrain to get up to the third ventricle, which is going to be up here. The midbrain has 4 posterior bulges. So you can see on this posterior side, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bulges here. The top 2 are called the superior colliculi, and those are going to be involved in controlling eye movements, so motor function of the eye. And then the bottom 2 are the inferior colliculi, which are going to receive sensory information from the ears. And together, all 4 of these are often called the corpora quadragemina. So corpora means body, quad means 4, gem means like beginning. So if you see this term corpora quadragemina, it's referring to the superior colliculus plus the inferior colliculus. So something I mentioned in all of these places was the reticular foramen. So this is a loose web of gray matter. Gray matter typically means that it's not myelinated. Gray matter is going to typically be involved in integrating neural information rather than just transferring it from one place to another. So this is going to have a lot of functions and functions in somatic control, so that's control of your body, cardiovascular control, pain modulation. So pain modulation meaning that There are tracts that come down from the brain to tell you what kind of pain you're feeling. So there are actually analgesic pathways that help to deaden pain in certain situations, sleep and consciousness, so whether you're asleep or awake, as well as habituation. So habituation is kind of when you get used to things. So if you walk into a house and you smell something, eventually that smell sense goes away, and that's not because the smell went away, but because your brain just kind of tunes it out. That's what habituation is. And so you can see these radicular foramen starts in the brainstem, comes all the way up through the medulla, through the pons, through the midbrain, and then relays information up here to the thalamus. And then the thalamus is going to relay that information to the rest of the cerebrum. And then there are pathways that go back down this reticular foramen all the way to the spinal cord. All right, the next part of the brain we have is the cerebellum. So you can see this is that caudal protrusion back here, back where your occipital bone is going to be. And you can see a section here. So in the center, we can see the white matter and the gray matter. The white matter makes this branching structure called the arbor vitae. Arbor means tree, and vitae means life. So this is your tree of life in your cerebellum. And then all of the rest of this is gray matter. And it's very highly folded because it's got a very high surface area. So there's a lot of interpreting and integration of information happening here in the cerebellum. The main function of the cerebellum, we believe, is controlling muscle coordination and monitoring muscle contractions. And this was something that wasn't discovered until about the 1970s. And a lot of what we've learned about the function of the cerebellum comes from studying people who have lesions or tumors on the cerebellum. Because a lesion leads to deficits, so the inability to control muscle coordination. And so we've kind of interpreted that to mean that the cerebellum coordinates muscle coordination. The cerebellum can also evaluate sensory input. So, for example, if you were to walk around and touch objects, then you would be sending that information to the cerebellum. It's also important for keeping track of time. So not just like how long has it been, but determining the location of an object that's moving. So you can imagine this would be really important for a predator who's chasing a prey to anticipate where the prey is going to be while they're chasing it. So we're going to move up even further into the next two regions. So here we had the midbrain, hindbrain, and the diencephalon. So now we're into this is the diencephalon, these two regions right here. So we've got the thalamus, and the thalamus looks like two oval projections. So there's one on this side and one on this side, and they make up a total of about 23 nuclei. And nuclei are going to be gray matter. So this is going to be involved in interpreting information as well as passing information to the cerebrum. So the thalamus is called the gateway to the cerebral cortex because the thalamus is right here, and it's going to receive information from the brainstem, cerebellum, and then transmit it up into the cerebrum. So almost every signal to the cerebrum has to go through the thalamus. Taste, smell, hearing, equilibrium, vision, touch, pain, pressure, hot and cold, all of these things get transferred through this thalamus. And it acts kind of as a gateway to process and screen information. So not all of the sensory information from our body gets to our cerebrum. A lot of it gets processed out at the thalamus, and the thalamus decides what's important and what needs to be sent upstairs. This is also going to be involved in memory and emotional functions of something called the limbic system. So the limbic system is a group of different brain structures that are going to be involved with emotional responses. The hypothalamus, so hypo means below. So this is literally located, here's the thalamus. The hypothalamus is right here below it. And again, we can see some of these nuclei. So each of these nuclei is a ball of gray matter that's involved in interpreting information. So the anterior edge is over here at the optic chiasm. This is where the two optic nerves meet from the eyes. The posterior edge is over here by the mammillary body. The roof of this stops when we get to the thalamus up here. Thalamus. And then the bottom is down here. We have something called the infundibulum. Which is a stalk here that connects to the pituitary gland. And so the pituitary gland is sitting right here in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. So this is going to majorly have control over autonomic nervous system and then the endocrine system. So endocrine is going to be our hormones. The pituitary gland releases tons and tons of hormones, which you will examine the first chapter you get to Anatomy 2. You'll do the endocrine system. And then the autonomic nervous system is going to be how your brain controls some of the body functions in your body that you don't really think about. So like your heart rate, your breathing rate, your circulatory system, your digestive system. Autonomic nervous system is going to be responsible for things like fight or flight responses. So take a moment and describe the structure and the function of the reticular foramen.